Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 2023 film Older Gods. Now, the production company actually reached out to me and asked if I would review this film. Currently, you can only get it to rent and potentially buy, I'm not 100% sure, through Amazon. So it's exclusively with Amazon at the moment. But by like somewhere between August and September, they have informed me that it should be available on all video on demand services and some free with ad services. So keep your eye open if this sounds like one that you want to check out. Now, anytime I get a request like this where someone says, this is a lower budget film, I'd really like you to check it out, I always say yes, and I always say, I'm just so you know, I'm going to be very honest, because I do want to give people the opportunity to say that maybe I don't want to review if they don't think their film, is at a certain level. But of course, most people feel like their film is quite good. So that said, I did say that, and this is not a film that I enjoyed a lot. There are things I did like, because with all my reviews, I say what I liked, what I didn't like. Overall, I didn't love this film. I didn't hate it. There are redeeming qualities to it. I do think that this is one that will definitely find its audience. So there are subscribers out there who I do have in mind, Entropy Stings being one that may be into this. And when I say that, some people will already know what one of my big gripes with this film is, and that's pacing, because I'm big about pacing. This is a very slow film. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through the review, but just know up front, not a big fan of this film. I'm being totally honest. I always feel bad about that. But I know everyone then says in the comments, like, don't feel bad about it, you're being honest. I know, but especially being a lower budget, more independent film, like, I want to like it. Like, I really want to like it, but I just can't lie to people about how I'm feeling about films. So that's why I give the good and the bad. So let me go ahead and get into my review of Older Gods. This one's written and directed by David A. Roberts. This is the individual's first feature film. He'd done a bunch of shorts prior to this. I will say this is a good foundation to start from, honestly, for feature filmmaking. You can tell he knows what he's doing from a direction standpoint. It looks really good, too. Like, cinematography-wise, it looks nice, other than lighting issues, which I'll talk about in a bit, which is another one of my big pet peeves. But I do think for a first feature film, this is a good start. So, David A. Roberts, you're on the track. Just keep... I was going to say, like, take my notes, but, like, I'm just a dude, so, like, it doesn't really matter that much. But listen to some of what I have to say, or don't. It's totally up to you. Because, like I said, I do feel like this will find its audience. Synopsis, quick synopsis. It's about a guy who lost his friend who was kind of in a troubled state at some point. He just kind of went missing. And he wants to know what happened, what went down with this guy. So he goes over to Wales, and he starts doing kind of his own investigation of what happened with this guy. So there is this kind of like mysterious aspect, this investigative aspect to the story, which is interesting, and that does intrigue you from the beginning. And then it's about what he finds out, and it's horror related, and I don't want to say anything other than that, except that they do go kind of large concept. And I'm going to leave it there. Some people who have already seen it will know what I'm talking about when I say large concept. But I don't want to go any further because I don't want to ruin it if people want to watch this film. I do like the opening music for this film. It's got this kind of like guttural, primal sound to it, which is obviously very intentional. It actually does tie into the content quite well, and something that's actually talked about at one point within the film. So I think the structure of the actual music, the score in this movie, is quite good. I do think it gets overused, though. That's one of my big issues with it. I wish there were a lot more moments within the film where the music is totally dropped out and they're focusing more on just the characters and dialogue, sound design even, because the sound design in this is quite nice. I think they did quite a good job with the sound design. I want to shout that out for sure. And that's one of those things where, like, you don't always notice sound design in film. So when it does stand out, it means it was done pretty well. Pretty well to really well. But yeah, so the score, liked it construction-wise, like how it's used in certain instances, but I just think it becomes a little too much. It starts to feel a bit too repetitive because a lot of the music it sounds very similar. And when you're constantly hearing it instead of dropping it out, it gets a little bit repetitive and a little bit droll. So for people who like vocabulary words. The glimpses before the title card that you get are definitely intriguing. This is one of those things, a lot of films have been doing this, especially horror films lately, especially low-budget horror films, where they'll kind of have a scene right before the title card that's supposed to kind of hook you, to grab you. This one does it. I say glimpses because it's not like a full scene. It's kind of like literally glimpses into something that's going on with the film. Very intriguing, in my opinion. I thought that was effective. Then the title card. There are some moments in this, and this is one of my pet peeves. People know about this with me if you've been watching long enough. Some shaky camera work. Some instances where maybe it would have been better to go with using something like a tripod as opposed to just kind of handheld camera because, you know, people aren't really running or it's not intense or anything like that. So I do feel like that settled down as the film went on. There were more issues with that in the first probably 10 minutes, I would say. And then after that, I started to not really notice it. So either it wasn't bad to the point where I just kind of got used to it, or it actually was taken care of after a certain point. Like they started it and then it's like, maybe we don't want to go this route, and then kind of changed it up while they were doing it. But just throwing that on out there. Shot well, like I was saying, there are some really interesting kind of inspired shots. Nice angles that are used. Framing is interesting at certain times. So, like I said before, it does look good. This is a good start for directing features, in my opinion. It has a good mysterious air with some interesting tidbits that kind of keep you engaged. Now, this is where the pacing becomes a problem, though, because if you're going to have a slower paced film, which this is a pretty slow paced film, I feel like for people like me, you need to drop, interesting breadcrumbs at certain intervals. And breadcrumbs could end up being in an instance like this where it's kind of like solving a mystery, just bits of information that come from people. Or it can be actual events that happen, like dread-filled moments, tension, and stuff like that. Would have liked to see more of those dread-filled moments pop up. Would have liked to have had more tidbits kind of thrown in. It's not to say that they're not there. This film is not devoid of that. It's just that the pacing of it and how much of that we get until the end of the film is just not enough for me to keep me fully engaged. So that's where the pacing becomes a problem for me. Good, solid acting in this, I do have to say. There is nice acting in this. The phone stuff, though, the acting with a guy on the phone, the other voices, not the person who's being shown on the phone, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes sound like it's line delivery. So those were a little bit rough at times. But there were some that were pretty good. Some conversations do seem to be unnecessarily long. This goes to the whole pacing issue. Conversations at times, they're just kind of like, you get the point of it, and then it seems like it just goes a little bit too long of getting into like niceties between characters that you don't really need, kind of rehashing some things that you don't really need. And then it starts to feel like maybe this was padding to kind of stretch the runtime. This is, with credits, like an hour and 21-minute runtime, so it's not long. So two things about that. One, if it feels like it's bad pacing when it's not long, that's a problem. That kind of points to this should have been cut down even more, because you don't need to get it close to an hour and a half. Literally, I say this all the time, the movie Host that was on Shudder proved that you can make a film that's under an hour, and it's very engaging because they just do what they need to do, and then they're done with your time. They're not shooting for an hour and a half. They weren't. I think it was like 58 minutes, and it was great pacing. So, yeah. But the other thing is, on the other side of the whole runtime thing, this isn't one that you're going to sink a lot of time into, so it might be worth taking a chance if you hear anything in this review that's interesting to you, because you're not going to devote 2 hours of your time. It's under an hour and a half, so it's not a lot. Worth a shot in that sense. Already talked about the score. There are some really good and effective images that are kind of put up in this. Imagery is well used. That's something that obviously Roberts is good at doing. I wanted more of that throughout the film and put it into more of a scene, because there are ones where you get like flashes of that imagery, maybe longer scenes of that type of imagery, and cut down on the scenes of the conversations and just kind of like downtime within it. Just my thoughts on that. I do think the dialogue is well crafted. I think Roberts does have a good ability to write dialogue well, and that's not an easy thing. I know I've written scripts before, not ones that have been like produced or anything like that, but I've written scripts before, and I just know the process of trying to write dialogue that sounds right and is doing what it's supposed to do. It's tough. And so I really picked up on the fact that the dialogue is well written. And obviously the good acting then helps out with that as well. It kind of takes it up. I do have issues with the lighting. I kind of already teased that I was going to talk about this. This is one of those films that it looks like a lot of the times they were trying to use natural light as much as possible. And it does not work too well, to be honest. A lot of instances where it's too dark. I cannot see everything that I want to see in the film. Now, I'm not saying it's like Alien versus Predator Requiem. That is atrocious. It's not quite like that. There are things you are able to see, but it just really bothered me. The lighting really bothered me. It's way too low, especially in instances where there are some things happening that I really wanted to get a good look at what's going on, and I just couldn't. So that's one of the things that I really didn't like. I will say at about the 50-minute mark is when the pacing does start to pick up a bit more. That's kind of when the story hits like that next step up, and it's kind of like, okay, here we go. We're going to start getting into the end of this. It's going to start getting more interesting, and you're going to start getting even more answers at this point. So just know that. There's some good stuff in the ending, but I think ultimately it's not for me. The other thing is the ending for me was way too drawn out. This goes back to the whole pacing issue. The ending, way too drawn out in my opinion, especially for what the content of it is. There were some good things in there that really was kind of like throwing me personally a bone, where I was just like, okay, I like this portion, but it felt like a bit of a jumble of taking too long and doing some more like low-key stuff along with some more like higher tension, interesting stuff. The other thing is, there is something, and I'm going to read exactly how I put this. There's something used to appeal to people that is an immediate thumbs down for me anytime I see it in a movie. Now, this is more of a personal preference thing. You might be able to guess what it is if you know me well enough and if you've heard me talk about certain things in film, but there is a device used in the end of this film to get to pulling at people's heartstrings to a degree. It is something that does not work on me because of who I am as a person. I'm not saying that it won't work on other people, because I do think in general it does work on a lot of people, so I don't fault it. I just think it gets overused, and for me it's an immediate eye roll situation, and I thumbs down the use of that all the time. I'm just like, no, do not do this. Unless it's done in some sort of other interesting way. And the way it's put into this, it feels like it doesn't even need to be there, to be honest. I think just throwing that out would have been better. Throwing it out with the bathwater, if you will. There is an interesting very last scene. You know how a lot of times at the end they just kind of want to leave you with like a very little something just at the very, very end? I did like that. I thought that was nice. Not going to say whether it's like set up for another movie or not, but it was a good image. It was interesting. It was just this nice little morsel to end on, in my opinion. I do think overall, and this points a lot to the kind of pacing problems, and the fact that it just felt like it was too long, even though it was an hour and 21 minutes with credits. I think this is way better as a short film. I don't know if it started as a short film, but this plays as a short film that was stretched out to try and be a feature-length film, and I don't think it works. It doesn't work for me personally. But that said, like I talked about, there are good elements to this film, and I know that there will be people out there who watch it and who are just like, yeah, I actually really enjoyed this. And that's where this is a perfect time for me to tell people, put it in the comments. I'm always down to hear differing opinions on movies, because if you kind of tell me something, it could actually change my opinion. I'm not one of those people who's just like, no, this is my opinion, this is how I experienced it the first time I watched it, and I will never like this movie, and if you don't like it, you're stupid. I'm not one of those people. I'm very open-minded. I'm down to listen. I'm down to have a dialogue, so we can go ahead and do that. Tell me your opinions on this movie if you do watch it. The last thing I want to say about this is that I feel like this film speaks to some of the human desire to always know what's happened. I mean, obviously what I'm talking about is this guy going to find out, what happened to his missing friend. And I think this movie does a decent job of kind of pointing to that human nature that we all have of just wanting to know what happened in all instances, even if it's a situation where maybe it's best left untouched. I'm not saying that that is the case in this movie, but there's obviously horror in it. So in the end, maybe it was a good idea that he looked into it. Maybe it wasn't a good idea that he looked into it. But it gives you, during the ride of the story, the idea that, did he really need to do this? And I think it just speaks to that bit of human nature. We all have that urge. I do. I know I do. And it can be bad. It can be bad. But anyway, out of 5 stars with half stars in play, I'm going to give this a 2-star rating. I'm sorry, I can't go higher than that. Like I said, I wanted to be very positive about it, but for me, this is a 2-star movie. Just being honest. But thank you, Wagyu Films people. Thank you, David A. Roberts, for having people reach out to me to do this. I always want to support independent movies. So if anything sounded interesting, go ahead and rent it on Amazon or on any of those VOD services once it's available in August or September. But yeah, comments, do me a favor, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Would appreciate that big time. Also hit the notification bell button, then you'll know when I'm putting up new videos. But regardless, thank you for checking this one out, and until next time, keep it brutal.